Hello everyone, Forrest here. This is Bitcoin and not crypto, formerly Taking Back Crypto. Before we get into today's topic, which is how Bitcoin can defund and potentially stop or at least limit future wars, I'd want to do a little bit of housekeeping. Part of that is that I changed the name of the show from Taking Back Crypto to Bitcoin, not crypto. Felt like I just wanted to simplify things, make it very clear what this show's about. I think Taking Back Crypto, it kind of looked like talking back crypto. It kind of felt a little bit confusing. It took a little bit more explaining the fact that my goal was to attempt to basically take back the term crypto and make that just about Bitcoin. But the thing is that's a very lofty goal, and I think one that is basically impossible as long as Bitcoin stays open source, which will be forever because it's already been spread out and decentralized so much, the code of it, and all the other projects that have open sourceness to them as well, all the other crypto projects. These projects will continue to grow, change, expand, pump and dumps. As long as people can get away with them, they're going to happen. Vaporware, Ponzi schemes, pyramid schemes, anything else that you can do with under the guise of brand new technology in the crypto sphere, that will continue to happen. And I think Bitcoin is better served to differentiate itself to crypto because, like I said, crypto will just continue on its own path. And there are that tiny little sliver, that 1% of the 99 that is vaporware and scams of usefulness. And I don't think that usefulness competes with Bitcoin, as I've previously stated. I think Bitcoin will be the monetary base. Layer 2s will facilitate a merchant adoption and all the other use cases that we need for base layer money, like privacy and just speed and interoperability. I think the 1% of crypto projects that will provide some sort of value will provide value in some other way. Maybe ownership of digital art, maybe, I don't know. It seems useless to me, maybe not to other people. One place I could see NFTs being useful is to authenticate a single official ticket, perhaps, for an event. It creates its own little signature there, and it's on a blockchain that is validated by consensus group. I think that it's possible, but I think also that'll probably just be done on Bitcoin. So maybe there'll be something else on crypto. I don't know. Who cares? It doesn't really matter because none of those things hold any sort of weight compared to the value proposition of Bitcoin being base layer money, taking a share of gold, taking a share of bonds, taking a share of real estate, which are massive markets compared to Bitcoin. And Bitcoin is slowly and steadily gaining market share in all of the global financial assets out there. So that is why I changed the name from Taking Back Crypto to Bitcoin, not crypto. Another piece of housekeeping before we get into the subject. I know this is a lot of housekeeping, but sometimes a house is dirty and needs to be cleaned. The other part here is I want to tell you about my Geyser Fund. This is a crowdfunding project for a film that I'm making called The Land of Volcanoes and Bitcoin, which dives into the past, present, and potential futures of El Salvador, the country that first adopted Bitcoin as a national currency. Check out the link in the description for more information on that. And let's get into the subject, which of course is how Bitcoin can stop wars. Now, this is something that's extremely important to me. I'm not in Bitcoin because of number go up. I'm in Bitcoin because I want to preserve my purchasing power. I want to preserve the energy and time of my past actions. But I'm also in Bitcoin because of its fixed supply. Now, there is nothing else in this universe before Bitcoin that actually has a truly fixed supply. Gold. If we believe the universe is ever expanding and is infinite, then gold is infinite, because we have found gold on asteroids. We know we have gold in the Earth, which means it's in other planets. And if the universe is forever expanding and we have no way of basically quantifying it in our way of being able to perceive things, then gold is infinite. Now, there's, of course, energy restraints to making it feasible, or making it not even just feasible, but making it a project that's worth doing to go mine these asteroids, but that's another problem. Oil, of course, is the same thing, and oil is just a way of creating energy. And there are other ways and other competitors to creating energy. And oil could be replaced. And oil can actually be created. You can actually create a hydrocarbon from basically condensing CO2s and different chemicals. It's chemically can be made. Now, Bitcoin cannot be made. Bitcoin is locked in time. You could copy Bitcoin's code and you could make a Bitcoin 2.0, but it would be inoperable with Bitcoin itself. So Bitcoin, part of what makes it so valuable is that interoperability with anything else that somebody else has created. Bitcoin is Bitcoin. Bitcoin Cash is Bitcoin Cash. It's something completely different. And should probably call it Bcash because it's basically trying to go off of the name of Bitcoin and say, hey, this is Bitcoin, but for merchant adoption. And it's just going to run into the same exact problem that Bitcoin had during its early phase of merchant adoption, which is limited block size. I never really understood. Maybe I need to look into Bitcoin Cash a little bit more, but making the block size bigger is like such a temporary fix. It just doesn't make any sense. A layered, side chain just makes so much more sense. And then have it settled on this ultra secure block that can actually pay the subsidies to the miners to keep the network running in a decentralized fashion. So that's the whole block size wars there. Let's get back to why Bitcoin can stop wars. It is the first thing, like I said, that is truly a limited supply. Now, what that does, and because it can't just be copied and created for nothing, it limits the ability for a nation. I'm going to use the word nation, but you could kind of exchange that for the word government, ruler, king, emperor. These are going to be interchangeable terms. I'm just going to use the word nation. But a nation basically creates money for next to nothing. Nations basically have their own altcoin that is incredibly centralized and has a next to nothing cost of creation, just like a lot of altcoins have. Now, Bitcoin costs close, depending on the mining, depending on you as a miner, the companies as a miner, but if we average this out, it costs close to what it sells for. And that is a real world cost. And, we price that in dollars, but you could price it in gold, you could price it in oil, you could price it in energy, you could, as electricity. It has a close to the value, real world cost to it. Unlike printing dollars or literally creating dollars digitally, just by adding dollars to a balance sheet, basically, which is what happens when credit is created. So that is a huge difference between Bitcoin and dollars. And when a nation cannot do that, it limits its ability to fund its operations. So let's try to explain this a little bit more, and I'll come back to this a little bit. But I want to first kind of talk about the three different ways, and the first two are much more simple. So let's get those out of the way and get back to what I was talking about there. There's three different ways that nations fund themselves. One is debt. So issuing bonds that other people, other nations, companies, basically anyone with some free cash will buy, and that debt has an interest rate on it, so they get more back than the amount that they put in. So if the interest rate is 5%, and it's a 1-year bond or 1-year debt instrument that the nation issues, you pay $100 for it. At the end of the year, at the 1 year, you get $105 back. So that is one way that a nation can fund its operations. That ties in with money printing and inflation, and I'll get back to that as well. The second way is through taxation. So that is a direct taxation of the populace of the nation. So that's income tax, property tax, food tax, sales tax, all these different types of taxes. This is money that goes directly to the government, and then the government can use to fund its operations. Now, the third way is through money printing, through inflation. Now, inflation, a lot of people get kind of confused, and there's a couple different ways to think about inflation, but people kind of think, oh, the gas price has gone up, the food price has gone up, that's inflation. Well, what I'm talking about is inflation of the money supply, and that drives the cost of everything else in dollar terms or in nominal terms, in number terms, basically. So how does a nation fund itself with inflation? Well, if it can print money for next to nothing, if it can print more dollars, and it can actually use those dollars for something before the rest of the world or the nation itself realizes that that additional money has been added to the supply, then those dollars are worth more, or those dollars are worth what they're worth at the time of printing, even though money is a market good, which means that it is affected by supply and demand. So they're increasing the supply, but until everybody recognizes that the supply has increased, the demand basically stays the same. And the supply stays the same as well, because it's kind of a hidden supply increase. Now, this can only happen so long. I mean, there is reporting that happens when money printing happens. It's called M2 growth, or there's M1, M3. These are basically different money creation. And I would recommend kind of getting into those definitions yourself. I won't get into those right now, looking into the difference. But M2 is the big one that people pay attention to, and that's kind of somewhat of the money increase in the market. So when inflation happens, when more money is printed, there's a consequence to that. It doesn't just happen and everything's okay. There's a consequence. So what happens is everybody else that is holding money is diluted because the supply has increased, and the market eventually catches up to the fact that the supply has increased. So your dollars buy less because there are more dollars out there. Now, how does that fund the government? Well, they do have that ability to use that money quickly. There is this effect called the Cantillon effect, where the people closest to the printer benefit the most, and the people furthest away actually get hurt the most. So there's a benefit and a hurt based on how close you are to the fresh, warm money coming out of that printer. So that is how they can benefit, right? So they buy goods, they hire services, they do all of this, and they basically, it's less about the government benefiting, and it's more so about individuals benefiting from being close to the printer, but they're able to also, hire a lot of people and fund a lot of war activities through having a money printer in this way, where they can dilute the money supply, which lowers the value of all the savers in a nation and allows whoever's getting that new money to basically have zero cost to acquire that money and they can use that money to fund wars. Now, the other way that it funds wars is, I talked about the other way with debt issuance. Inflation of the money supply has a really adverse effect to savers. It lowers the value of your saving. It has the exact opposite effect where in the fact that debt and savings are the exact opposite, but it does the same thing to the exact opposite of savings, which is debt. So what I mean by that is, if you owe $100 and you have a 10% inflation, that $100, when you have to pay for it, so we have 10% inflation per year, which is very high, but realistic in certain areas of the world. If you have to pay that back in a year, that $100 has lost 10% of its purchasing power. So the purchasing power is actually $90. So it's kind of like, it's not the same in nominal terms, but it's kind of like you actually only owe $90. So the more inflation happens, the more money printing happens, that actually lowers the cost of the debt, which is a direct way of funding war. Debt is a very direct way of funding war. There were times when the US government even printed something and created something called war bonds. This was like, hey, if you buy these, you're supporting the war front. And it was a patriotic, nationalistic idea of, let's fund our soldiers to fight the good fight in these wars. But now, our bonds, our debts, our national treasury bills, they fund all sorts of government mismanaged spending. Not just wars, but war is a big one for me. So inflation basically lowers the cost of the debt repayment. Now, there's also, when inflation happens, inflation of the cost of things, the inflation of wages and has to kind of match it. And it doesn't perfectly match it. It's often less. But in that way, it lowers the cost of things because you can acquire more nominally, less actual purchasing power, but more nominally to pay off the same number. Now, interest rates are basically supposed to offset that. You should be getting a positive real rate of return for the debt that you have bought. But if you buy debt at 5%, and inflation is 10%, your real rate of return is negative 5%. So your asset has to appreciate at more than 10% if inflation is 10%. So basically, this $35 trillion that is constantly going up, that is an insane number to look at, which is the national debt of the United States of America, which is not per capita or per GDP the worst offender out there. Even Canada's worse, where I am. These numbers, the government, the spending aspect of this, they actually want inflation. They want money supply to go up. They want to devalue their dollars so that debt becomes less and less. They can issue these bonds and actually pay the people that buy these bonds less than the money creation that they do. So it's basically government bonds in general, they're a big scam. The only reason you should ever have bonds is because you're old and you need reliable interest payments. But even then, you should just set up equities or Bitcoin. Bitcoin fixes this, right? You buy Bitcoin, it outperforms all of these equities over time. There's different ways you could use that to live off of. the worst case, right? You sell a little bit of that over time to and convert that into the food or living that you need as you retire. So really, the use of bonds is just out of pure laziness, out of pure ignorance to the fact that you're getting a real rate of negative return, and they are funding government mismanagement and wars. Now, some wars, we can talk about them being justified. We can talk about how they're important for freedom, for the people that there's some oppressor and all of this. But let's look at a bigger scale here. If we go back into history, when nations were on a sound money standard, when two nations fought each other and the rulers of each nation had to pay the army in sound money, in gold, right? Gold is sound money. Like, Bitcoin is much better than gold for so many obvious reasons, but nonetheless, gold is sound money. Now, what makes it sound money? The stock to flow, the relative limited supply, the cost of acquiring it is close to the value that it actually has in comparison to other terms. Now we value it in dollars, but back then, it would be valued in bread or grain or cow or whatever. So that cost of production really puts a limit on how much a ruler could use, right? How much do they have in their stockpile? How long can they fund this army to fight this war? Now they have a nation, right? So they have all their people. So they start running out of gold supplies because, or stock, because they're paying all these mercenaries, this army to fight and to try to attack this other nation or defend against another nation. Now, what are their options? They have two options because they don't have the option of inflation. They have the option of taxation. Now, taxation is extremely unpopular. Today as well, it's extremely unpopular because it puts a lot of strain on the citizens. And the citizens will say, you know what, we actually don't want you as a ruler because you've taxed us to starvation, or you've put a strain on our lives, and we think that you're doing a bad job. So that's why taxes, the government doesn't say, hey, we're going to fix the national debt by raising taxes, cutting expenses. It's very, very unpopular and doesn't really happen very often in the world. So back in these days, right, the other way would be, creating something like war bonds, saying, okay, we're the government, we're going to pay you back, we're going to issue some sort of certificate, we're going to pay you back this amount of gold if you give us some gold today. Now, these things had some sort of limited success in different areas, but what would ultimately happen, without the ability to inflate the currency away, to continue to pay for war, these wars were extremely short. And a ruler would basically say, okay, we have to come to an agreement because I know this is very expensive for the other ruler as well. They have a bigger army than we do. They seem to have more gold than we have. They can hire an army for longer. We're going to concede. We're going to say, hey, you can take this land, you can take these resources. We've lost. But there would be some sort of agreement, some sort of concession, or the other way around, right? The other ruler would say, okay, we've lost. And oftentimes these wars in the past, when nations were on a gold standard, were much shorter than the wars that we have today. We have endless wars. The United States is consistently and constantly fighting many wars, and have been for the entire formation of the United States. And they're not alone on that. They are just a big offender. So if we got back onto a sound money, wars would have to be fought like that. If all the soldiers said, no, we don't want your money that you print for nothing. I will only fight for your army if you pay us in Bitcoin, real Bitcoin, Bitcoin that can be traded on chain, held in cold storage, can be swapped for Lightning, used for merchant transactions. If that is the only thing they are willing to accept, if that is the standard that we have, then the governments need to acquire that Bitcoin. And where can they acquire it? They can acquire it through raising taxes, through issuing some sort of debt that I don't know why anybody would buy, but they could, and maybe somebody would buy it. And they could acquire that Bitcoin. And then they could redistribute it to fight whatever wars they wanted. And I think that it would be much harder for them to fight a war if people did not accept money that was printed out of thin air at zero cost. And if every nation did this, which it wouldn't make sense for some important nations to do this and others to not do it, because the citizens would be like, why are they only accepting Bitcoin and we're accepting rubles, we're accepting rupees, we're accepting yen, we're accepting euros? Why are we accepting these things when they're rapidly depreciating compared to this other currency with a finite supply, a fixed issuance, and a cost of production? Why? And there would be a rapid adoption. And with that rapid adoption would come a limited amount of ability of a government. And with that limited ability of the government would create the stopping of wars. Number go up technology also means freedom go up technology. And Bitcoin is a Trojan horse. As more and more people adopt it as an asset, as a commodity, whatever, the more and more merchants will adopt it because it's so easy to create a Lightning payment system. It's so easy. Yesterday, I just bought some gelato with Bitcoin in person. And it was easy. It was fast. It was easy. They gave me a nice discount. They're Bitcoiners. And it's pretty hard to do that with any other commodity. I can't go in there with a bucket of oil. I can't go in there with a bar of gold even. So it's a currency. And eventually, everyone else will see that as well. And if we stop saying we want your cuck bucks, we stop saying we want your fiat dollars, and start saying we want your Bitcoin and we'll only take your Bitcoin, this can really change the world for the positive.